Hi everyone, it's Elise from Kid and Clouder and welcome to our free floral colouring class featuring the Kindness in the Way free digital stamp from Power Poppy. In this class, I'll be taking you through real art fundamentals and techniques to help you learn and understand not only the basics of colouring with your markers and pencils, but to feel confident with the fundamentals of colouring floral images. If you're new to Kid and Clouder, I specialise in teaching marker and pencil classes for all practice levels. I don't like to call it skill levels because no one is more talented than anyone else, but we do all have different amounts of practice which influences what our results look like. Our classes are not like a quick YouTube tutorial. Each class is designed to challenge you to try new things, new styles of images, and to go a little outside of your comfort zone. They're actual lessons to help you take the steps to the next level with your colouring. That little push is what we should always strive for when we have a hobby. It keeps our minds active, and not only that, the other side of a challenge is achievement, something we should all be striving for in our personal lives to help us feel fulfilled. We go through real art fundamentals and concepts to teach you not only how to colour, but the why behind these techniques. So you're not just learning how to colour the images used in class, but how to actually take away what you're learning and apply all of these individual techniques to your favourite images after the class lessons. When taking a class together, it's very important to remember that this here today is just a practice. Technically, this should be your worst colouring today because you're challenging yourself to try new techniques. We want to make mistakes so that you can start to troubleshoot, to learn and to grow your colouring to that next level. The only way you can fail this class is by not having a go or not finishing. So don't be nervous at all. Let's embrace every single mistake on your journey as they're great tools for learning. Write practice on the page right now next to your image. And whenever you feel any frustration at needing to be perfect, just flick your eye up to that word and remind yourself that every colouring is just that practice and opportunity to grow. Just by having a go today, regardless of your end result, you've taken that next step in your journey to growing and learning. If you feel stuck at any point during the class or feel like you aren't getting the results you want, our classes always come with free private tutoring on anything at all, so please don't ever hesitate to reach out either on Facebook Messenger privately to myself or via email so we can work together to help you feel confident. Even if you just feel a little nervous or finding it hard to start, I'm here to help every single step of the way, and you're never alone at Kid and Clouder. So this class today will show you the basics of colouring one of the solid colour large florals in both markers and pencils, one of the two-tone flowers, the text, and the simple background. While we don't colour every single flower in this free class, you should feel confident to re-watch the video to practice the technique on the other florals, as the techniques will not change if the colours do. So before we jump into the colouring, let's go over one of the most important aspects of colouring that should be the main thing you think about every time you colour any image at all, and that's light source. Now, when we colour anything at all, we need to be thinking about some art fundamentals that help inform our decisions in our colouring. Now, one of the most important art fundamentals that you will learn is the light source. And it's tricky to learn it at the start because it's a true art technique that not a lot of us really know about until we're taught it. But basically, whenever we're colouring an object, we need to imagine that light is illuminating the scene. So there's sun up in the sky or there's lights in the ceiling, and they shine down rays of light that hit the objects in our scene and illuminate them. Wherever those rays of light come down and hit first, they are our brightest areas, and we call them our highlights, and we show these using our lightest colours. The opposite of this is our shadow. So they're the darkest areas and the part that the light hits last. So we represent these with our darker markers. Now, in between highlight and shadow, we have midtone. Now, midtone is generally considered the true color of an object, as it's neither affected by light or shade. So that's a really good way of picking color blends as well. You can always start out with what you think the midtone color is going to be, and then picking markers lighter for your highlight and markers darker for your shadow.
If you'd like to learn more about colour theory and how we pick the colours to suit this, pop over to our website, kitandclouder.com, and click on Classrooms, then Markers 101. It's a free class there that goes through colour blends and how we choose them to work with lightsource and more lightsource instruction as well. But one of the most important things that we need to look at is cast shadow. Now I've popped a pen over my hand here, and can you see the shadow that's on my hand? That's our cast shadow. It's a shadow that's cast by an object in front or above, which is my pen, onto an object below or behind, which is my hand. And what this does is it actually shows distance between objects. So the closer my objects are together, the darker and harder the shadows are here. Then the further apart they get, the lighter and more dispersed our shadows become. So you can see utilizing cast shadows in our scene is very important to help to show different depth and levels in what we're seeing in a scene. So we're going to have areas that pop out towards us and areas that look like they're sitting further back. Don't worry if it sounds a little bit too overwhelming. We're going to be learning a lot about it today, and if you would like more of that basic instruction again, feel free to pop over to our website and head to that Markers 101 class where we'll break it down even further for you into those real basic fundamentals.
So in Chapter 1, we're going to colour up the big pink flower first here. Now let's go through some of the basic theory before we start colouring in either our markers or our pencils. So looking at each little petal here, you can see that we've got a whole lot of depth occurring, and we're utilising those light source aspects that we just went through in the previous part of the class. So you can see here we've got really nice, rich, deep shadow areas coming out to bright highlight areas. So most of the tips of the petals here that you can see are where the lightest colours are occurring. And that's because if you imagine that light source coming down onto the page here, it's hitting those edges of the petals that are sort of popping out the furthest. Now where each petal curves back in and down toward the centre here, notice that that's where it's darkest. That's a good rule of thumb when you're colouring flowers. Petals will always be darkest in toward the middle here because they're curving in and down away from the light there. And it's the same with each layer of petals. So you can see here with the second layer at the bottom, it's also darkest in toward that middle. And that's also occurring because we've got cast shadows from these petals in front. So remembering whenever something is sitting in front, it's casting that shadow back onto the objects below. And you can see that right here. This petal here looks like it's sitting in front. There's a nice big dark cast shadow just around it there to make this petal look like it's sitting further behind. So now you can actually see what we've been talking about with light source in action and see how utilizing contrast between light and shade actually creates the levels in the image. You can see as well, if we look at the petal as a whole, there are some lighter areas that come the whole way through. Now these areas here, notice how they look like they're popping up towards our face. So anything that you leave as a lighter colour is going to look like it's standing up and popping out. So this would indicate we've got a little ridge in the petal which comes up toward the light and then back down. And you can see on either side how we've got our darkest colour there, again showing how that ridge curves down away from the light on either side. So the sides here going down on that angle and not receiving as much light as the ridge that's popping up toward us. Some of this may feel overwhelming if you're brand new to colouring and you find it hard to actually see that in your images. It's something that comes with a lot of time and a lot of practice. And this is why when you're doing your classes, you go over this every single time we do a class together. And this is why our monthly classes at Kit and Clouder are so helpful, because every month you're subjecting yourself to the art fundamentals, you're going over, you're asking those questions why, and you're looking at technique. The more you look at, practice your technique, the more that you start to refine it, and it starts to sink in a little more every single time you go over it. So after this lesson today, the next time you're colouring flowers, even consider to grab this lesson out again and go over each step of those fundamentals, embed those techniques and start to refine them again and again every time you're picking up your markers or pencils. So we only learn by practice and by refining that technique. Coming up to this middle part here, and it's the same sort of thing. You can see as well that we've got it darker along the side and it's heavier on this left side here. So what that's actually indicating to me is that we've sort of got the side of this middle part and then it curves up toward the top. And this top face is where it appears a lot lighter. So it's using that color again to indicate the planes of the object. And then we've got this middle center as well, and again the same thing. Darkest here where it's sort of curving down and then it pops up. So you've got all these different levels. There's 3 components here of the flower. You've got the petals and several layers of petals. You've got this middle part here which has a little bit of texture to it. And then you've got the very center. And each of these individual objects has its own highlight, midtone, form shadow, and any cast shadows that you need to add in as well. So every time you pick up your markers or pencils, think firstly, what's sitting in front, what's sitting behind? Where can my cast shadows go? It's a great first step no matter what you're coloring. Then we think about that light. What do we want to appear raised up to us? So what's going to be the lightest and brightest? What's furthest away? So what's going to be darker, having the form shadow being away from the light? And what's my true color of the object? That mid-tone that we see peeking through, where it's neither affected by light nor shade. Now you can see on this image, that's that beautiful pink color that we're seeing here. We've got a beautiful pinky tone throughout. Then we've got lighter colors through the highlights and quite dark colors through the shadows. And even though if you look at those darker colors individually, that's looking at a color as dark as this, but the flower isn't this color. It's still pink. We can see it's still pink, but we've utilized that contrast to really make those extra areas and levels pop out. So now that we've gone through those basic theories, let's go ahead and apply them with our markers and pencils. In the first part of the video, I'm going to be showing you the pencils. Now, even if you use markers, I encourage you still to watch this part of the video because you may pick up some extra tips that aren't talked about in the markers portion of the video coming up. Okay, so I'm ready to start colouring with my pencils. Now the paper that I'm using here today is Mid-Tont by Canson, and I'll have those details below in the video description as well. There are all different papers you can use for pencils, and we've got a grade section on our website called Colouring FAQs. If you head to www.kitandclouder.com, and that link will be below as well, click on FAQs at the top of the page, then Colouring FAQs. Wait a few seconds for it to load because there's a lot of information. And then you'll see there information on different brands of markers and pencils, how to get started. You'll see digital stamp resizing tutorials, printers, inks, and also papers. There's a whole list of different papers for markers and pencils to use there. With pencils, when you're colouring with just the pencils themselves like we're going to be doing here today, we need to use paper with a tooth, and that's a printed texture. It allows the pencil to layer up and build in all of that texture of the paper. And the more layers you add, the flatter the paper becomes. But what it does is it allows it to grab onto the pigment and allows the pigment to sit at different levels in the paper, creating that color blend to our eye. Now, if your paper that you're using today is quite smooth, that's okay. But just remember to go really, really slow and soft while you're doing your shading. You'll get to a point where it stops allowing the pigment to layer up. And when you get here, you'll sort of feel it. The colors sort of start sitting on top of each other and you're not really building that depth anymore. And if you're using just, say, a standard regular copy paper, you may see almost a scratchiness, all the lines when you're adding the color down on the page. And that's not anything you're doing wrong. That's actually because of the paper. It just doesn't have the ability to take in that pigment like on something that I'm using here today. Now I'm going to be coloring just by layering up the pencils. You may have learned how to color with pencils using solvents or blending solution such as Gamsol. Personally, I don't like to do this with my coloring. So if you're a fan of my coloring and my sort of look that I do, the reason why I don't like this is because Gamsol actually waters down the pigment. So not only do you lose a little bit of that vibrancy and the depth, but you also lose a little bit of control over your coloring. So personally, I don't love to do it. But if you do, that's totally okay. The techniques that we're going to be doing here today are going to be exactly the same. All you'll do is start exactly the same way that I do here today. I'm going to be doing several layers of just the pencils themselves. Once you've done one full layer or even two full layers to build up the color depth, that is when you'd come in with your Gamsol and apply that to help with flattening and blending further down. So if you ever want to follow our classes, it's exactly the same thing. Techniques are always the same whether you're using solvents or not. But if you've never tried just the pencils themselves, I encourage you to have a go today. It's a really fun way to tackle them and approach them without needing any other messy ingredients with your colouring. Makes it a lot more portable and versatile as well. Now, one more thing I'm going to touch on before I get started is I'm going to be using a very special tool here today, and that's our Kit & Clowder pencil duster. Now, if you haven't seen these before, we sell them over on the website and they're free worldwide shipping. I had them made especially for us because I couldn't find anything that would dust away the pigment of the page without pressing the pigment down. So as we color today, or as you're coloring, you may notice little bits of pigment fall on your paper. And if you're not careful, you can actually push them down and get little bits of color graininess all over the page. So I used to use a feather, but then my feather used to break and it used to leave little bits everywhere and it wasn't the most effective at cleaning. So I had one made for myself and then everyone asked for one as well, so I had them made for everyone. And then they're super duper soft and you just brush away the pigment on your page as it starts to build up. Now if you don't have one of these and you don't want to grab one, that's okay. Use something really light such as a feather. An art brush or a makeup brush can be a bit heavy, so make sure you're really careful when you use these that you're not pressing the pigment down the page because it can actually leave a build-up. Alright, that's it from me. Let's get colouring. So I'm going to be doing this pink blend here today. Now to do this pink blend with my pencils, I'm going to be using quite a few different colours to build that up. So we know that we want to use darker colours in our shadow areas and then slowly get lighter as we go through the colours. Now to get the pink blend, I'm actually going to be using crimson red in my shadow areas. I'm going to be coming down into pink, blush pink and then deco pink. So you can see there we gradually get lighter through the blend. And of course we'll be having some white in there as well. Now if you're using a different brand of pencil here today, remember in the link below in the video description, you can find the color blend charts that'll help you use different brands of pencil as well. Just keep the tables next to you so you can easily see a visual transition between what I'm using and what you're using. And if you don't have these colors here today, you can use absolutely any colors in your stash. Your techniques won't change if your colors do. Just make sure you're keeping with the art fundamental rules of your darker colors for your shadow, pick a color a little bit lighter for your midtone, and a color a little bit lighter again for your highlight. Okay, so jumping in with my crimson red, make sure your pencils are nice and sharp because it will help you have control. And we're going to start firstly by looking at car shadows. So let's take a look here and we'll just start at any point. Say I'm picking this little petal here. Now I can see that this petal, if we look at the outline, it comes around and intersects this petal here on its left. So it looks like this one, we'll call it petal 1, is sitting above petal 2. So all we do is we pop straight on petal 2, so remember whatever's behind gets the shadow on it. So petal 2 being behind, we're going to lay down a nice thick car shadow here. Now keep your pressure nice and light. The aim with pencils is lots and lots of soft, light layers, not pressing down too hard. You will see little bits of white sort of speckles there. That's just the tooth of your paper showing through. We don't want to get rid of this too fast because then it's almost like we're using smooth paper and it's not as easy to blend up anymore. So let's continue around the petals. Now I can see this petal looks like it's sitting in front of this petal here. We can see that because the lines come through uninterrupted and they come the whole way around, sitting in front of this petal beneath. So the same thing, popping that nice big car shadow straight on top. This one sitting above this one here, which also has this one sitting above it as well. So let's pop in a nice big car shadow around any of the petals in front. Now if I look at this petal, I can see that this one comes along the side here and that's intersecting and sitting in front of that petal. that petal as well. So we go through and add in a nice thick cast shadow the whole way around this one. Remember to keep that pressure light as you're working here. Don't want to press down too hard. It'll help you get more control over your color blend as well. And you can see I'm just following through around each petal now, adding in that cast shadow around any petal sitting in front or above. Now I can see here my text. The text here has a white sort of border around it, and you can see when my flower sort of stops here, and that's allowing for that white border around the bottom of the K. So I'm going to make sure that I don't add any color up into where that text is meant to be. So just be wary of that while you're coloring. If you're a little bit in the moment, you can sort of forget and color over parts of this, which I have done before. So while you're coloring today and you're doing things like cast shadows, take your time to practice mindfulness. Now, mindful coloring is something that we're really passionate about at Kit and Clouder, because coloring should not be an activity that you take out stresses of life on. It should be your activity where you release pressure and expectation. We're learning something new, but that doesn't have to be a stressful activity. Focus on just laying the color down on your page as you're working, seeing how the colors come together, seeing how the strokes work, and how we're building everything up. So let go of any tension that you have, any thoughts that may be on your mind at the moment, any pressures about the past or the future, and just focus wholly on what's happening on the page. Now, if you're going through a lot in life at the moment, sometimes it can be really hard to do that. And we can take that out on our coloring and really, really want it to be perfect and get really frustrated when it doesn't quite happen for us. So I want you just to release that at the moment. And even if you can only allow yourself to have de-stress time for 10 minutes, that's all you need. Take this 10 minutes just to de-stress, to feel more balanced, and to feel a little bit better about everything going on around you. Taking an actual lesson rather than watching a YouTube tutorial takes time because you're learning a lot of techniques. You're not just watching someone show you what they're doing. In a class, it's a lot different from just a standard YouTube tutorial because we're going through all of these art fundamentals, we're breaking it all down, and you are having to be challenged. Challenge is a great thing because it's allowing you to push that a little bit further to get better results in your coloring. And it does take time and practice to do that. But you don't have to sit here today and do the whole video. Watch it in little chapters, and if you click the button below as well to go to the channel to watch the video, you'll see that this video is already broken down for you into little individual chapters for each flower. So it can feel a lot less overwhelming, but it also places less time pressure on for you. Keep your colors out in a cup so you can easily pick everything out when you've got a spare 10 minutes without having to need to prepare each time you want to do some coloring. It can be a really great time-saving method for you. And while I was chatting there, I finished all of my cast shadows the whole way around. Now you can see just by adding that step that each individual petal now stands out, and it's got its own depth of color happening here. Now what I'm going to do before I move on to my next color is I'm going to add some form shadows. So form shadows, remembering where the object is furthest from the light. So it might be curving down away from the light, so you might have the bit popping out towards us as lightest, and then it curves down on that angle, and that angle not getting as much light is going to be darker. So remember, that's our form shadow, not cast shadow. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start in the middle area, and we're going to look at any details that artist has added in the petals. Now, one thing I love about Power Poppy's stamps, who we're using here today, is that she adds a lot of little visual cues in her artwork. So you can see what I mean by that is these little lines indicating where little creases are in the petals here. So you can use them to help you with your coloring. So don't ever be intimidated by the amount of detail that Marcella adds in her images. It's actually really great because it helps you to take those next steps and have that sort of starting point. So let's work with that. I'm going to start here in toward the middle. We know that's darker because it's curving in toward the middle. And I'm just going to add a little bit of shading up either side of the 2 lines that she's added here. Now if I bring my original coloring back just to show you, this same petal that we're working on here, you can see that middle area is a ridge that's popping out toward us. So that's what we've done just here. We've left that middle ridge uncolored and we're starting to add shading to either side where it's curving down. So this doesn't need to be super duper thin. You can see that I went back and thickened it up because it's more that plane of it falling away. Shadows have a little bit of thickness. We want to leave the middle as sort of free of this darkest color because I want it to look like it's sort of popping out and then back down. So on this end, if there's any little details, you can add those in as well, just to show that that little edge area is going to be a smidgy darker. Now let's pop into our other petals. So the same thing, try and start in your, we know that this is a good form shadow area here. Start in there, then come up and look for any details. So I can see a little line here indicating a little ridge, indicating that that area there on top is actually the lightest because it's popping out. So I'm going to just add a little bit of shading to meet up with that area there. Extend down. There's also a line through my middle here as well. And let's continue that through. Now this area here, you can see the lines come into sort of a V shape here. And that indicates to me that this middle area is actually darker, with these 2 edges sort of coming out and up, hitting the light first. So let's start in the middle and we'll come around them. Now every so often you're going to see me twist my pencil, and that's because I'm always trying to work on the very tip of the pencil. Always trying to work on the sharpest point. I'm going to add a few little shadow lines. I can see at the edge a couple of details that the artist has added. I'm using them to help indicate where my shading should go. A little bit of shading on the side as well. Now there's a big line coming straight through the middle, but remember what we talked about before. We want the very middle to sort of be void of that color if we can. So I'm going to add just a little bit of shading from the top. We'll come and populate that with our mid-tone colors. Continue through, adding my shading around each little petal. And again, remember, if you don't quite see it or understand how we're adding in that extra detail today, the more you practice and the more you ask yourself, why are we adding detail here? Go over your lessons, join in with some of our other lessons at Kit and Clouder. It's going to end up making more sense. But the starting point is always a little bit tricky because it's new. Not because you're not talented or you're not good enough to learn this. It's just because it's new to you, and new things take time. Let's see, bringing up my shadows, coming from that little top area there. The only time I'm really leaving this darkest color through the middle is if we've got a really big crease like this one here, that big vein that's sort of running through the middle, indicating that everything's coming into that sort of crease point. And there's a lot of different ways to color flowers as well. A lot of the time the detail comes down to your stylistic choice. So what we do in our classes at Kit and Clouder is we teach you all the art fundamentals with a little bit of stylistic choice in there, because of course whenever you follow anyone's tutorial, you're learning how they color. But we're teaching you not just what I'm doing here today, but why I'm actually doing it, so that you can learn this the next time you color up your stamps. And it's when you're comfortable with all of those fundamentals that you then develop your own style. So that's then when you start to pick where the details are going and saying, okay, I actually want to use these sort of colors. I want to do a two-tone, or I want this sort of particular detail, the light coming from this way. We start to develop that understanding and that style when we actually learn all of the fundamentals and how things work. So sometimes I get people, or I've seen people say, why would you do a class when you don't want to color like someone else? That's not what taking a class is about. Taking a class is about learning fundamentals and the skill set for you to actually be able to make those stylistic choices yourself. So you don't actually lose the ability to create your own style. You actually gain it because you gain knowledge. And knowledge on not just how we're doing this, but why we're doing this is how you actually become more confident and to make those creative choices in your work. So you can see coming along these little crease lines here and extending them out. Now in big petals like this that don't have any detail, this is what I was talking about before, we can actually make that creative decision to add in some detail. So we can see most of these petals have sort of 2 lines or 1 line coming through and adding in the creases. So here I can actually choose to just come up and add in 1 line, and then I might come in and add in another line so I can do that vein through the middle. So I've just utilized the shapes and the creative direction that the artist has already given me to go back and add in that little bit of detail myself. Now where I've got this little step in here, I've added a little bit of a line as well, just to show that we've got a little level happening there too, this part on the edge being raised. So we're taking that little bit of control into our own hands now. My pencil's getting quite blunt, and as my pencil gets blunt, I start to lose control of my lines. So now would be a really good time to give your pencil a quick turn in the sharpener just to bring up that point so it's a little bit sharper and you have that control. You always want to make sure the pencil stays sharp so it gives you that crispest outcome. And that's step 1 of the flower done. So you can see we've incorporated cast shadow and form shadow with my darkest color in the blend, which was my crimson red. Let's get ready now to start blending that out. And the next color that I'm going to be using is my pink. So all I'm going to do is start right where we started. I'm going to pop straight over the top of this color, the crimson red, and I'm going to extend a little bit further out. Now you can see I'm taking my time, working very, very, very softly here. And the idea behind this is again building up in soft layers, getting control over the blend. I can still see white speckles of my paper showing underneath. And that's okay because the more layers I add, the more that's going to flatten down. But if I flattened it with too much pressure too quickly, then I lose the ability to really build those layers on top and have control over both my line work and the color direction. Now, it's totally normal for people to add too much pressure while they're doing their first practices with pencils. We all do it, me included. So don't ever feel discouraged if this is what you've done and you feel like it's sort of turned into quite a hard amount of coloring and you don't have that soft smoothness to it. It just means that next time you pick up your coloring, it's something that you're going to work on. And if you work on it rather than giving up on it, you're going to improve it. You can see extending just a little bit further than this color each time, each layer I'm coming across. So really, once you've done that first step with the darkest color, that's the hardest part. The rest is actually quite easy because you're just going over the work that you've already done. Make sure that you're regularly checking your pressure on the pencil. How hard are you holding it? If you've got it in a death grip and it's really hurting your hands, loosen it up. It shouldn't ever hurt your hands. If it does, you're just holding it too hard. Some of these lines you can even extend out a little bit further if you want as well. You can see them coming over the top and then pulling through that a little bit further. Okay. Now at this moment, sort of shake everything out. So get your hands, shake them all out, shake your head out, shake your arms out. And I want you to lift your image up and hold it at a bit of a distance. So you're moving out of scrutinizing your work in such an up-close detail. This is when we tend to sort of focus so much on any mistakes or anything we don't like and everything like this. We need to sort of let ourselves go from that a little bit. Look at it from a distance and actually appreciate how it's all coming together as a whole. Often tiny little mistakes that we don't love tend to actually blend into the whole piece as you work. So I think this is good to do every so often and take a quick walk around as well and come back to it. But we're ready to move on to our next color, and that's my blush pink. So I'm just doing the same thing, just popping straight back over all of the colors here. I pop back over all of the colors because what it does is starts to tint out that darkest color. So it really depends on the color blend you like, but you'll notice that my darkest color becomes a little softer with my blush pink. Sort of layers on top and removes a little bit of that darkness. This is called tinting the color because you're using a lighter color to change the tone and the value. Now remember as well, when you're doing your shading here today, how much of each color that you use really determines how light or dark the blend becomes, and that's the value of the color. So if you've been quite heavy-handed with the shadow colors, then your blend might look darker than mine. If you've been quite light-handed, your blend might look lighter than mine. There's no right or wrong for this. It's just that control over the pencil. And remember that my coloring is not an example of perfect coloring. So your coloring doesn't have to look like mine for you to have learnt a lot today and for you to have done a great job. It's just your sample with your class. It's just one way of doing things. And remember, I've had a lot of practice. And so have a lot of people in our classes. So whenever you do a colouring, I'd love for you to share online. One of the most rewarding things is actually sharing your work and getting that feedback from your fellow community members. But be inspired by what others are creating, but don't ever compare with what others are creating. We never know how much practice someone else has put in to get to where they are with their colouring. So it's never fair to compare. Compare only with the colouring you've done last. Next colour, Deco Pink. And the same thing, I'm coming the whole way back. Now this colour is our lightest of the pinks. So it's going to cover most of the area here. Now in the raised areas, I'm going to come around sort of where the bottom of the petal is, where it would sort of curve around and under a little bit more, knowing that this section here, that very top ridge, is going to be the lightest. So you're covering over most of the area, but not all of the area. I can actually use my white pencil through the very highlight areas to bring the color up a little bit bolder. Helps to emphasize our highlights and flatten that a little bit more. Remember to keep clear of any of the white areas around the text as well. Now in these smaller petals, there's not a lot of area left, so I'm just coming around the sides, leaving that very middle where we know we've got that raised area as the lightest color. Okay, so that's my shading after one layer. Now what I'm going to come back in with now is my white pencil. And I'm going to add this from the lightest area. So start in the white, go over the white, and then just go over where the color is ending. Now I'm taking my time working lightly, but I'm working in very small circles. And I'm bringing this only back over sort of where my blush pink is ended. The Deco Pink was quite light, so we don't really see that much. But bringing that back over where the pink sort of ends and it drops down to the white of the paper. Now any creases in the middle of the petal, sometimes the creases can get a little bit messy looking. So you can see here there's little bits in here and it's not very well defined. You can bring the white straight down through the middle with multiple strokes and notice how that just cleaned that up and now it just pops even more. So that's what that can really help to do. So you're bringing this through the highlight straight over the top and just circling very softly back and over where the pink has sort of ended amidst the white of the paper. It helps to flatten the tooth and it happens to facilitate that smooth blend. If you bring the white the whole way back over your shadow area, it's going to tint it. That's what we talked about before, and you lose that depth. But that's okay because at this early stage, we can see a lot of the tooth in the paper showing through. So we know that we need to do another layer of pigment anyway to flatten that down. So we will actually build up the depth that second time around. So if you feel you end up being a bit heavy-handed with the white, don't worry too much. You can always come through and layer again to build it up. And this is why using a good paper is really helpful, because it actually gives you that control and that ability to go back again and keep layering until you're happy with the look. When the paper is quite smooth, after all of these layers that we've just done, it starts to reject that pigment and you may actually find it a little bit more difficult to layer up more while keeping everything smooth. So that's the difference between using the good papers and the smooth papers. You can get still good smooth papers, but not so much for pencils. Now if you're using solvents, this might be a point where you might like to add in the solvent rather than so much the white. However, if you haven't built up enough color depth, remember that once you add solvent, that's kind of it. You've already laid down sort of that finishing touch. So usually what I do is just take a look at my coloring and see if it needs more depth. And if it does, I come back and do another layer again, just like I'm going to do anyway, before adding in the solvents. So if you're wanting to use solvent, I would just keep going personally, adding in another layer. You can even do the white like I'm doing now, and then that extra layer, and then to finish it up, you would add your solvent rather than the white the second time. So you can see coming on the sides here, going straight through that middle and just blending out the very highlight edge of each petal. Okay, so that's it after one layer. You can see just by looking at this and hold it back from a distance, you can see that all the petals actually have a lot of depth, and we can see each one is popping out from each other. But we've got a long way to go to get from this to get to this. So let's keep working it. Now we're going to start again right in the very shadow areas with my crimson red. Now make sure your pencil is nice and sharp, and all you're literally going to do is come straight back over the top of what you just did before. I'm not using any more pressure. I can still keep my pressure light because what happens is the paper is already becoming full of pigment. So now if I add this second layer, it's just continuing to naturally flatten it down without me needing to really work it. It's still not 100%, and I've got more colors to come anyway, so I'm not too worried about it really getting all really pushed down at this point. So just keep going with it. Keep your pressure light, so make sure every so often you're checking yourself with how you're holding your pencil, making sure that you don't have it in this really hard grip, pushing down as hard as you can. I know it can be natural for some people just to adopt that. Maybe that's how you write with your pens and pencils as well. So just work on it, just check every so often and see how hard you're holding the pencil. Another thing you can do is hold the pencil further back, and it will stop you from placing so much pressure on the pencil, but you also do lose a little bit of control. But it just might be something that you say to yourself, what you're doing today is okay, it's just a practice, and then the next time you have a go, you can just keep working on it. And every time you remind yourself, every time you try a little bit more, you're ingraining those techniques in your mind, helping you to remember. Okay, so that's my darkest color all done again, and you're just going to work your way down now from dark to light. So this is pink, and I'm just coming straight back over the top, Keeping again the light pressure, but I can see already the tooth in my page is really starting to flatten down now that I'm coming in with this color back over everything as well. So just coming through, layering up again over everything and extending that a little bit further out. So you're basically just repeating what you did in those first steps, but because the pigment is already on the page, you've already done that legwork, it's just helping it to blend flat and to build up the color depth this second time. Now remember, if at any point you're feeling totally confused or you're not getting the results that you'd like with your pencils, don't just put it aside. It's key that you take a quick photo, pop it through to myself on Facebook Messenger privately, or email elise@kiddingclouder.com, and let's go through this together. So you're never alone at Kidding Clouder. We go through anything at all. You get free private tutoring with all of our classes, even your freebies. It takes a lot of time for me to do, but it's so important for me that you actually enjoy your coloring and you're actually learning. I remember I started just like you, just as a brand new beginner. I wasn't particularly great at coloring, but man, I put in the practice and I wanted to do this. So I have made every mistake possible, so you never get judged, don't ever feel embarrassed. It's not what it's about. It's all about helping you to feel confident, to keep going, to have that determination to want to learn, just like I did when I started as well. So I'm always here for you every single step of the way. So make sure you ask for help. Don't ever treat your classes, even though this is a freebie one that's going to be up on YouTube, don't treat it like a YouTube quick tutorial that you're watching. Treat it like a proper class, and sometimes when we are learning and we're in a class environment, we need to get help because things are a challenge because we're learning all the time. So ask for that help and let's do it together. Make sure you're brushing away any dust as you work too. Don't let it build up on your page. Keep it all nice and clean. Alright, next color in the blend, Blush Pink. And we're just continuing with this one as well. You can even bring this color the whole way back. It's still a mid-tone color, so it's not going to lighten our shadows too much. But with this particular blend, I want my shadow areas to be more pink rather than red. So adding the pinks over the top of that red area keeps how dark it is. It keeps the value of the color, but it just tints it a little bit. So it's less red, more dark pink. So remember, with pencils, if you use both pencils and markers, that's where your difference lays between the medium mainly, is that control over color. If you don't have a particular color, you can make it. So that's the really fun thing with pencils. I really enjoy playing with color theory, coming up with fun color blends and all that sort of thing. If you ever want to try some of our color blend charts, just head to kiddingclouder.com, click on color blends at the top of the page, and I've made a whole bunch of free color blends for you. So these are actually Kidding Clouder blends. Every time I do our classes, I always experiment to make our own blends. Okay, Deco Pink is next. And the same thing, you're just coming over the top, filling most of the area with this lighter color, but not all of it. Don't forget you still got your white to come through as well. Okay, and now our lightest color, we're going to bring that white straight through your highlight areas. So start in the highlights, in the creases, in the parts that are popping up, and blend back only over the lightest pinks. Just flattening any tooth that needs it, transitioning the colors nicely where you need to. Try not to bring this color the whole way back, because remember, if you do, it's going to tint it out, making your shadows a bit more washed out, pastel looking. Again though, if this happens and you find you're not happy at the end, just pop in one more time with that darkest color and you can again deepen them up. Okay, and that are my flower petals all done. Now there's an extra step I've added, and I'm only going to do this at the end to show you how it's built up. But see here the difference between the two flowers? And again, it looks really different without the center done as well. So we're going to do that in a moment. But you can see that this one here has a little bit more depth than that one does. So a little trick at the end, I'm going to show you how to bring it up even further. Let's go in and do the center on this one. I'll zoom back in. Okay, now you can do the centers in such a big variety of colors. I'm going to do maybe something a little bit different from what you'd expect, and I'm going to be using black raspberry to start with. So it's a really dark red-based brown. And that's because usually with the gerbers, they pick up the colors of the petals through all the center areas. And because we've used more reds and pinks, the black raspberry is more of like a really dark maroony color. So that's what I'm going to be using here to start with. Now through this area, I'm going to use a technique called scumbling. Now scumbling is when you do little sort of scribbles like this, and you do them compact in areas to build up depth, and then get lighter as you get further out. And you can see there we've got highlight, lighter areas, mid-tone, and darker areas to create shadows. And so it's just building up messy sort of strokes back and forth to build up a textured stroke that still has the light source incorporated. So I'm going to start at this side here, and I'm going to scumble in and toward the middle. Now as I get further in toward the middle, I'm going to space them out a little bit so it's not as dense as that edge. You can come around the whole edge, keep it thin on this other side. I'm going to do the same thing in the center here. I'm going to scumble along the bottom. Now keep it thin as you come up this side as well. So we're going to kind of mimic what's happening in that center, thinner on this side. It's indicating a bit more our light is directional from this side. Only slightly though, it's not a big thing because remembering again we're working with that ambient light source like the sun outside. And you can see I'm making it a little bit thicker on that side. Now coming in, I'm going to use my burnt ochre. And I'm going to scumble straight over the top of this in the center. Just a little bit around the edge. And then the next color that I'm going to bring in is my beige. And I'm scumbling straight through that remaining area there. Now I'm going to repeat the previous steps just because using the beige got rid of some of that texture there for me. So I just come in with the black raspberry again. Now as I'm getting further out, I'm sort of lifting my pencil and just sort of dabbing it there so it gets that texture back a little bit. And then I bring my burnt ochre back from the very shadow area because it'll fill some of those gaps. And then lift and just dab this over the highlight, but not filling that whole area. Now coming back to this main area, I'm going to incorporate some of the pinks and reds that we used from the petals. So I'm going to start with crimson red, scumbling straight over the top. Keep it nice and messy. It's all about getting a little bit of texture. And further on the other side. And then my pink, I'm going to do the same thing, keeping it all messy. Almost just like dabbing the pencil as well. And now through the highlight area, I'm going to be using the color Jasmine. And I'm going to start at the top in that highlight, and I'm going to scumble down and toward the other colors. So each center is going to have a little bit of yellow in it. But the colors around are always picking up from the petals. You can see we picked up from the shadow through to the mid-tone. Now let's repeat those previous steps. So I'm going to start with my black raspberry, scumbling from the bottom. Try to make sure that your lines don't all end straight across. So some smaller, some bigger. Just break it up a little bit to help it look a little bit more natural. Crimson red is next. And then a touch of pink. So you can see it really helps it to look like it's directional, and we've got the different sort of areas happening here, shadows versus highlights. Remember, when you're working so up close, it's not really going to look like anything. It's only when you hold it back and you actually see the image as a whole that these little details start to make a little bit more sense, especially when you're working with texture. Now to finish up, I'm grabbing my black raspberry again and make sure it's really sharp. And this step I've done over each of the flowers here for extra depth. So I'm going to use the black raspberry and start in at the very shadow area, and all I'm going to do is just come from the center and add a touch up each detail or shadow line into each petal. So it's only a small amount of this color, and it's only always in those very, very shadow areas. But I'll show you in a moment when I've done half of the flower the difference between each half, and it makes such a big difference in making everything pop. Now this is one of those stylistic choices that I talked about before. You don't have to do this, but I really liked that little bit of extra added depth that it gave my flowers. Sometimes when you're looking at half a colored image though, it can look too dark. Don't worry about that. When you've done everything else, it starts to make a bit more sense visually. Color always looks dark when it's compared to the white of the paper as well. So anytime you're ever coloring, you go, I think this is too dark. It won't be when you actually finish coloring. Now again, in talking about the colour I've used, you could use many different colours for this, but I've chosen black raspberry because of the fact it picks up a bit more of the red in my shadows. But I have actually used this on every single flower in my scene and my finished colouring. I just liked that it wasn't just black, it was actually like a dark colour. And it's the same colour used in all of the centres as well, so it did make sense and worked with the actual image. Now let's take a look. You can see the difference between this side where I've laid this colour and this side where I haven't. So you definitely can see how much it just helps the flower to pop out. So don't ever be scared of darker colours. They can really help you to get so much more depth in your colouring. And if you don't ever love a look that you've created, again, remember, colouring is just practice. We have to get out of always wanting it to look 100% perfect, because there's no such thing as perfect. And a good hobby is one that always challenges you, one that's not always safe and easy every single time you have a go. Because if you have a hobby like that, how are you really growing and improving your skills? How are you getting achievements? And achievements and that feeling of actually doing a good job and being proud of your work only comes from the things that challenge us. You can actually see that growth. So don't ever be fooled into not wanting a challenge or being scared of a challenge. It's always the best thing you can do for your mind. And that's flower 1 all complete. I'll just zoom out a little bit. See, again, what I'm talking about, when you actually zoom out on the camera, it's the same sort of thing. You move out of that up close mode where you're really just looking at every single little detail. So shake it all out now, shake your arms out, shake your head out, maybe do a quick lap around the house, come back and look at that with a little bit of perspective. And you can actually see how all the colors and all the textures and your light source and everything has come together to give you that finished flower. So I really hope you enjoyed colouring this one up with me. Remember, if you haven't gotten the result that you'd like with this one, take a quick photo, pop it through, and let's work together on helping you feel confident on what to tweak for next time to get a different result. I'll see you in the next part of the video. We're going to be going through the same flower, but with our markers as well. And then further on in the video, I'll be tackling some of the other colours of the flowers as well. In this part of the video tutorial, I'm going to be using the same techniques that I went through in the pencils portion of the video, but showing you how to colour this flower up with our markers as well. Now I'm going to be using Copic markers here today. They're an alcohol marker, and you can use any brand of alcohol marker to join in as well. Don't forget, in the video description below you'll find colour blend charts for some of the other more popular brands, but if you're using any other brand or you don't have the same colours that I'm using here today, absolutely feel free just to pick your favourite colour blends. The techniques will not change if your colours do, but we want to make sure that we're incorporating our light source that we went through at the start of this video, working with highlight, midtone and shadow colours. Now if you don't know how to do this, you're brand new to colouring, what I'd recommend is if you pop onto our website at kitandclouder.com, there's a banner right on our homepage, a pink banner that says click here for free classes. And there's a free class called Markers 101. And we actually go right back down to the very basics, how to pick colors to create blends and how to incorporate that with your light source. So you may find this really helpful, especially if you're using a different brand or you don't have a full set of markers and don't have what we're using here today. Now, if you haven't watched the pencil portion of the video, I would encourage you to do so. You'll always pick up different tips because I actually narrate as I colour, so it might be really helpful for you to pick up a bit more information on flowers as well. But I'm going to be showing you here today how to colour this flower. Now I am changing the blend slightly just to do something a bit different and just to keep it all nice and easy with the colour blends, keeping with that light source. So the colours that I'm going to be using here today are RV63, RV66 and RV69. So I've got a nice highlight color in my RB63. My RB66 comes into my midtone, and my RB69 being my shadow. And remember, you can see this by looking at the last digit of every marker. Again, remembering from our basic color theory that we go through in Markers 101, it's that last number that actually determines what type of color it is. So any Copic ending between 0 and 3 is your highlight, ending between 4 and 6 is your midtone, and ending between 7 and 9 is your shadow. The first number is more about that tone of the color. So we're working all with the 60s here today, and that's going to be a little bit easier to blend together because we know they're all part of that same family. We do get a little bit more in depth with different color blends throughout the class. So you'll see on your color charts there's all different blends that we do, and they may jump around in the numbering system. These blends have been picked so that they work really well together, and as you'll learn over in your Markers 101 class, it is okay to actually jump around within the color families and within the tonal ranges as well. Now the paper that I'm going to be using here today is a bleed-proof cardstock, and I'm using Express It blending card. It's my personal favorite cardstock to use with markers, but even if you're not using this one, just make sure that you're always using good bleed-proof card. Bleed-proof card allows the alcohol ink to sit on the surface of the paper for longer rather than it seeping through the fibers. If you're using standard card or even a lesser quality bleed-proof card, what you may notice is when you put your marker to the page, it actually bleeds out and seeps through, making it harder to create a color blend, but also sucking up the ink of your marker. So even though using good paper is expensive, the actual ink in your markers is more expensive. So it's going to save you money in the long run to just invest in the good stuff, and it's going to give you better results as well. So don't ever be shy of using it. We always want to use the right tools to help us get the best results, even when we're brand new to coloring. Now I'm just going to show you on the bottom of the page here just a basic blend first to help you get in the rhythm of things. Again, if you want to go over more of these fundamentals, don't forget to check out that free Markers 101 class to help you with extra strokes as well. But let's just start here with a basic feathering blend. So I'm using RV69 first, my shadow color, my darkest color in the blend. And you can see I'm resting my marker on my second last finger. Now I find this easier when coloring because what it does is it allows me to just lightly touch the marker to the page because it's 2 fingers up. So when I'm angling it toward the page, my touch is super duper light. I know some people color resting on the last one like this, but see when I go to color, I'm pushing down a lot more because it just pushes the marker into the page naturally. So it may feel uncomfortable at the start, but many people have told me that this has really helped them to get that light touch. So if you haven't practiced this before, I would encourage you to have a go now. If your markers are really new, what you'll find is that they may feel really inky, and you may be in danger of a big blob of color on your artwork. Uncap both ends of the markers as you work, and what that will do is just equalize the pressure and prevent any blobs or any excess ink from splashing down on the page for you. Now to do my feathering stroke, what feathering is we're going to hold it just as if we were writing, and then we're going to pop in and just really softly add to the page, and then you'll come parallel and lift up your hand to get a softer stroke as we finish. So let's try that now. I'm laying down on the page and you can see I'm using the side of the marker a little bit here rather than on top, and I'm lifting as I exit. You can see I've overlapped the strokes here, so you're not seeing individual lines, you're actually getting pretty full coverage. If you're using the tip, you may be getting things like this. Try to avoid that because you're not actually getting that full coverage like we want. Hold it a bit more on the side on that angle and layer it up so you can actually get that coverage there. Now the next color that we use, we come down, step into our midtone. Now this is RV66. And what I'm going to do is I sort of start the color just back from where this is ending. And I'm laying it down just real soft. Same thing, I'm feathering over the top. Notice you can still see the line of color there. So to remove that, I keep layering quickly over where that line is just until it softens. You can see right there it's almost gone. So then I stop. I can see a little bit where this color has started. So if I want to remove that, if you can see that, you just come the whole way back just once real quick, and it should just blend it straight through. So at the moment, we don't really have a line between the colors. If you've got a line, continue to layer up just real softly until it disappears. You can see I do this just lightly, quickly to get that result. And then we get our lightest color. And it's the same thing, we start just back a little bit. This is RV63. And then I'm building this up, multiple strokes, blending out that line. And once that's gone, I can stop, but I can see where that color started. So I want to get rid of it. So I come back a little bit and then layer up until that's now gone. And you can see what I'm left with is a successful transition from highlight to midtone to shadow, working through those colors there. Now I find when using markers, the first layer, sometimes my lightest color can actually take away some of that darker pigment. So you can almost see it gets almost like a little speckly sort of look, and the lighter color has just pulled away that darker color. So what I do is I pop in again, usually with my darkest color, and I repeat everything again. So I start with RV69, just lay down that feathered stroke where I did the first time. RV66, and you're starting just back, build it up quickly, and come back if you need to remove any lines. And then RV63, same thing. And notice now that time the color is a lot stronger and a lot smoother with the blend. Now you'll notice that I worked from dark to light there. I prefer dark to light than light to dark. The reason for this purely is it saves you money because you're using less ink. If we were to do light to dark, we need to go light, middle, dark, middle, light, and then repeat for that extra depth. So you're doing twice the amount of work to get the same result. In saying that, it's exactly the same technique. I started learning at light to dark, but eventually I changed it because it was going through my markers too fast and it was taking me longer to color. But there's nothing wrong with doing either way. So it's your personal preference, but I will be teaching you dark to light today because I think it's good to get into the habit of helping to save a little bit of money. So for this portion of the video with our markers, instead of doing the same flower I did with the pencils, I'm actually going to pop up and do the brighter one on the side here because this color blend works best with that one. Now with the Power Poppy images, one of the great things about them is she adds in a lot of the little details for us already. So we can see here all the line work and everything is already added for us in each petal, and we can use these as visual cues as to where to add the folds and creases in the petals. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to actually start with my darkest color, and I'm going to add in all of our cast shadow areas. So just like we talked about at the start of the video when working with light source, we need to look at cast shadows first. It's always a great thing to do on any image at all we color to make sure that we don't skip over that depth. So we want to look at what's sitting in front and what's sitting behind, and remembering whatever's behind is the thing that gets the shadow on it. So grabbing your RV69, let's just take a look at the petals. Now I can see straight away, if I just start at this point, this petal here, if I go along the outline, comes over and intersects sitting above this petal here beneath it. So we know this one, let's call that petal 1, is sitting above petal 2. So we pop in straight underneath and add in a nice thick cast shadow. Now cast shadows can have a bit of thickness. It doesn't matter if they're super duper fine. Thickness will help give you depth and perspective. So following this around, and I can see again that I'm coming around the side and it's intersecting with that next petal. So the same thing there. And I'm just following this the whole way through. Now with the text here, you can see it's got a little bit of a white border. So I'm trying to make sure that I don't come through any of those white areas. So just keep that in mind while you're doing your shading. I know sometimes it can be easy to skip over those little details because we get so caught up in the moment. I'm just tracing these through. Now remember today, if you have trouble seeing any of these techniques, it's only because they're new. The more you practice, the more you go over everything, jump in with your classes and go over technique, the more you start to refine and keep those skills in your mind. Okay, so that's our car shadows there all done. And you can see already that it just makes each individual petal pop out and have its own presence on the page. Now what we're going to do is pop in and add a little bit of the detail. Now to do the detailing, we're going to hold the marker nice and close to the end and just work on the fine point. Make sure you don't push the marker down into the page. Now if you're working with bullet tip markers, it can be a little bit more difficult, but it can be done with practice. So again, keep your pressure light and work nice and softly. If your line work ends up being thicker than mine, there's nothing wrong with that, and it's just something that you can work toward for next time. So coming in from the middle here, we know at this middle point the petals curve down and around toward the middle, making it darker. So we start in toward that line, and then we've got these two lines that the artist has drawn here. So remembering what we went through at the start, any areas that we want to appear raised up towards us will keep nice and light, and the areas to either side will keep darker to show those planes that are curving down away from the light. So I'm just going to do some fine lines up and toward either side there. Now if you struggle with thickness, try and work away from the line in the middle. So even if you've got a little bit of thickness on the sides here like this, that's totally okay. Now I'm going to try and leave the very middle area lighter because I'm imagining it's sort of popping out toward us. So starting in the other direction, and you can add a little bit of the shadow in that area back from the other way. Now we can just work through on each petal, working with the artist's drawn lines and the details that she's already added in here. Now in some areas we don't have sort of that where it comes back down, so that sort of point there. You can actually add this in if you'd like to add in a little bit of extra detailing. Coming up the side here, and you can see that it's keeping that area wide, which looks like our ridge that's raised up. So I really would encourage you to take the time to watch that pencils video at the start as well to go over the other flower. This part of the video, this is more of a pencils class than a markers class. I just wanted to add a little bit of marker instruction in for those of you who don't use markers, but you'll actually be able to see you can take every single thing you've just learnt from this part of the tutorial and easily apply it to the other part. The techniques for markers and pencils are very much the same once you just apply that basic blending method. Now in petals like this that don't have any detail, or over here where we're missing sort of that second line up, you can even come through and add in your own extra detail. And same on this one here as well. That's just taking a little bit of that stylistic choice and direction and adding it in yourself. And that's our darkest color done. Now all we're going to do is grab our next lightest color, the RB66, and we pop straight over the top. And you can see I'm just applying multiple strokes until that line softens down. So exactly what we did at the start of the video where we worked on getting rid of that line and blending smooth. It's really the same thing, but now we're just actually giving it some purpose. So we're working in the shadow areas to create the creases and everything for us. Remembering where you add your darker colors is where the creases and the shadows appear. So you can see here on this one, I'm adding the darker colors to the inside, the lighter colors being on the outside here to show that those ridges actually pop up. And there's so many different ways you can color flowers as well. So those stylistic choices are yours to make, where you want your shadows to appear. And that's one of the fun things about coloring as well. So while you're coloring today and you're doing things like car shadows, take your time to practice mindfulness. Now, mindful coloring is something that we're really passionate about at Kit and Clouder, because coloring should not be an activity that you take out stresses of life on. It should be your activity where you release pressure and expectation. We're learning something new, but that doesn't have to be a stressful activity. Focus on just laying the color down on your page as you're working, seeing how the colors come together, seeing how the strokes work, and how we're building everything up. So it gets a little bit tricky as we're coming around all this text. So try to just scale it back a little bit so you don't color over any of those white areas. RV63 is next, and it's the same thing. We're coming straight through these areas, multiple strokes over where the mid-tone color is ended. Now through that very middle, I'm actually leaving the tiniest slither of white, and notice that it just makes that pop out even more, that detail there. I'm also going to bring this color around the edges, and again, if you can, work on leaving that tiny slither of white. And that's again just amplifying that highlight area for you so you get a bit of extra detail. It's something that absolutely takes time and practice to achieve though. So if you don't quite get there today, again remember that this is just a practice. And the more you practice and go over everything, the easier it's going to get. So you can see a real advantage with working with markers as opposed to pencils is the time it takes to color an image. The pencils video for that first flower takes quite a long time and we're going through and layering up everything, whereas this one is quite quick. We're almost finished already. So the actual medium itself encourages you to work quickly so you can get a smooth blend. And because it builds up instantly, you are able to layer very quickly and with vibrant color. However, you lose a little bit of that control. So this is why some people find markers difficult, because you basically, where your ink goes down, that's where the color is laid. So if you do make any mistakes, you kind of have to live with it. As you practice more with markers, they do become easier and you do find yourself feeling more confident with them as well though. So it's one thing, don't ever give up on them if you've got them and you find it difficult. The more you practice and go over, the easier it definitely becomes. Now to build up that color depth again we went through at the start of the video, I like to do 2 layers of color. So I jump back in right now with RV69 and let's just repeat where I laid this color originally. So just going over all of your shadow areas. Now, the good thing is your hard work was done in that first layer. We already know where this color needs to be laid down now. And now we're just following through and building it up in the same areas. This will give you a lot more color depth as well. RV63 is next. And then my RV63. Come through again, remember layering up to blend anything smooth, and then a quick coat over your highlight areas. Leave the tiny slither of white where you want it to really look like it's jumping out towards you, if you can. Okay, now I'm going to pop in and do the center. Now with the center, you can see we've got two components here. We've got the tiny little textured area around, and then we've got really that middle area. Pop back my original and you can see this. So what I've done, that middle area, I've kept it quite dark. And you can see the shadows are around the edge, but heavily on this left side here, showing where it's starting in at the middle, curving down, curves up and gets lighter here in the middle area toward the light, and then it's curving back down a little bit. Same on this one as well. It's darker as it's curving down, and you almost treat it like it's that side plane of that object. So you've got the top here, which is nice and light, and then it comes down, and that's that side area there that you're seeing. So to do this technique and keep it nice and easy, rather than going through each of these little areas, I'm going to do a scumbling technique. And scumbling is when we grab our marker and we work nice and lightly on the edge, but we just build it up with a sort of messy stroke. Now it's messier and more dense in the shadow areas, and as we get further out, we sort of start to space it out a bit more so it gets lighter. So you end up getting highlight, midtone, and shadow based on the density of the stroke. Coming back here, now I'm going to use a few different colors here today to do this. Now I'm going to be using RV99, and I'm going to be using this because it picks up some of the reddy or purple tones that are used in the actual petals. So I'm just going to get this color and I'm just going to sort of do that scumbling technique on the side, just dabbing it in. Do a small amount along the top and make sure it's a bit heavier on the side there. Now I'm going to do this also around the base. You can almost just dab the marker around, but again, remember to space it out a little bit so it's not all a thick layer of color. Coming along the top here as well. And just dab that color in. Now I'm going to move into my next color, and the next color I'm going to be using is E15. So coming now into my brown tones, and starting in that middle area, I'm just going to dab this color more heavily on the side and a little bit at the top. And then I'm going to come into the very top of that area with my E13. And just dabbing rather than coloring over that whole area. And you can see we've got the transition from shadow through to highlight there. Now on the side, what I'm going to do with the gerbera, this little area tends to pick up the color in the actual petals. So rather than using any browns or any other colors, I'm going to come back to my petal colors, and I'm going to add a dab of RV69, starting in the shadow areas there, just dabbing it lightly. Then I'm going to bring in my RV66. And again, dabbing this color, starting the whole way back and dabbing up a little bit toward the middle. And to finish off, I'm going to pull through a little bit of yellow into each center that you do throughout the flowers. So Y21 is next, and I'm going to just dab this from the very highlight area and even bring it back and through some of that darker area. Now what this may do is pick up some of the darker pigment on your marker. And all you do is you just scribble it out after use and get rid of any contamination until it runs as the normal colour. That won't ever wreck your markers to do that if you accidentally pick up some of the darker colour, but just make sure to remove it afterwards. And if you feel like you need any other colour to break it up, I even come back with a little bit of the RB66, and you can see I'm just dabbing it roughly through the areas there, just to break it up so it's not so uniform the whole way across. And see how quick and easy that was to colour up. Now if you haven't watched the pencils video yet, what I'd recommend is popping now and going back to the bigger flower on the other side, this one over here, and using the same techniques that you just did here today, but on that flower while watching that video. So that's really going to help you see how easy it is to transfer the pencils techniques into markers as well, once you can use those color blend charts that are included with the video. Now, as always though, markers, just like learning anything new, requires time at the beginning to really feel comfortable with technique. So if you feel stuck here, what I would encourage you to do is take a quick photo, pop it over to me on Messenger or on Facebook, and let's work together to help tweak it a little bit so you can feel confident for next time. But what I want you to do right now is shake out your hands, shake out your head, get up and do a lap of the room, and hold the colouring back from you when you take a look at it. We need to get out of this up-close scrutinizing of our work where we see every little mistake and detail and we're really judging it. Take a look at the whole image and step back from it. When we actually step back, and even when I zoom out, you can see it in the same way, it looks so much different because we're actually able to have a bit of perspective and to see how all the techniques are coming together. Often those little things we don't love, so if you've been a bit thicker on the line work in one area or something like that, you won't even notice that at the end when everything's all coloured up. It's only when you're in that up close mode, when you're judging every little area, that you actually see it. So make sure that you don't ever judge your work. Keep going. At the end is the best time to see how everything comes together, and know that those little things that you don't love now are just going to fade away as part of the image as you continue on. So jump in now to try the next part of the video tutorial, and I'll see you in the other chapters. Okay, in this part of the video tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to achieve the two-tone flower here at the back. So you can see that that one's got some pink all around the middle area, and it actually blends out to have some white petals. So I'm not going to be going through every single flower in the tutorial here today because it's the same technique over and over again, just changing the color blend. So I'd love to see you try all those other flowers, but what I'm going to do is just show you this two-tone one just because it's a little bit different, and you may want to try this in a few other areas. So I'll show you with both markers and pencils how to do this step. So what you can see here is we're utilizing all the same techniques. We're working with light source, and you can see we've got cast shadows around each of these little petals in front that are obviously popping out toward us first. Cast shadows around all the major flower petals here. And then we go from the pink and extending back into the soft grays. Now, rather than keeping the white petals as just white, you can see that we do have the grey there, which helps to show depth. It helps to show those creases in the petals and to show where the petals are curving down and away from the light as well. So we don't just leave things as white. We still need to incorporate all of that contrast between colour if we want to showcase light source and keep our colouring consistent all over. So let's pop in with our pencils first to show that. Now I'm going to be using the same technique that I used on the first flower here. So I'm going to be starting with my crimson red. And let's pop in and add our cast shadows around each of these little petals that's in front. And now we're going to pop in and add in our form shadows. Now I'm going to add a little bit of a cast shadow though between each of these petals, but you can see I'm only keeping it in this very area. I'm not bringing it the whole way back. And even when you get to these outer petals, I'm not going to be doing those ones because they're quite far back there. That'll be where it's already transitioned with the colour. So now what we can come in and do is add in our form shadows. So I'm going to start with each of these little petals, adding in a little bit of detail along those artist drawn lines, showing that either side is the ridge there where it's lighter. Coming up the lines just a touch so you can see it's only a tiny little bit on the page there. Okay, and let's come into our next color. So the next color is going to be our pink. And then come straight over the crimson red and extend a little further up. Now remember, keeping your pencil nice and sharp is going to help you to keep control. And I'm just bringing that up just a little way. Now with this color, you can bring this a touch into these back ones. It'll just show the hint of that pink before it transitions through to the white. Blush pink is next. And just pulling through these little areas. Again though, keep this color to the same sort of area. You're not really extending this further down the petal because it'll make it too dark and we lose that two-tone ability. And then just a touch of Deco Pink just so it's soft. You don't need to place a lot of pressure on this color. Keep it only through this very area. It's just helping to blend down to the white of the paper because it's nice and light. White is my next color. And then we're going to start this from the white of the paper. And you can see all I'm doing is coming back over where the color has ended. So just transitioning down to the white nice and softly. It's just helping to remove some of that tooth. You don't have to bring this the whole way over the darker colors. It's just really over where that pink is softly ending. And the same in all these petals in the front as well. Now let's come through and add in the shading on the white parts. And I'm going to be using some greys for this. Now I'm going to be using my French greys, or if you're using a different brand, you may be using warm greys. Typically in sunshine, I like to color things that are white with warmer greys. The sun being yellow based usually adds a warmer glow onto objects, and I tend to keep my cool greys with things such as steel or aluminium that actually is more of a blue based color. So I typically like to keep towards those warmer greys. So I'm using French grey 30% here to start with, and I'm adding just such a small amount along any shadow areas. Okay, and you can bring that along any lines as well that the artist has drawn. but you don't need a lot of this. The more of this color that you add, the darker it's going to look, and it will look more gray rather than white. But remember, it is going to look a little bit gray in these initial stages because you actually are adding gray to the page. It's only once you color everything and you can see it in context that it actually makes a bit more sense visually on how dark it is. So make sure you don't judge it too early on. 10% French grey is next. And I'm just coming over the top and just extending out just a short way. This color is really light, so it's just helping to transition that down a little bit so it's not as strong. And then grab your white and come straight over the greys. Come over the whole of the grey if you like, and it will tint out some of the shadow areas so they appear even a little bit lighter, and then extend further down. So it should all blend nice and softly so you don't have any lines between colours. And that's all there is to it. So that's it all done, and then you can just do the centre how we did the one previously. So if I bring back my original colouring, so at the moment that might look a little bit grey on the page, but when you actually see it in context, notice how it actually looks a lot brighter and lighter because of what's happening around it and all the contrast and everything else as well. If you feel stuck on that aspect though, please feel free to pop me a photo and we can work on it together as much as you need. In the next part of the tutorial, I'll be showing you how to do that with your markers. Otherwise, I'll see you in the last part of the video where we go over the text and just a really simple background. So welcome to the markers portion of the video. So we're just going to be doing the exact same thing we did in the pencils portion, but I'm going to be showing you how to really quickly and easily do it with markers. As always, I encourage you to watch the pencils portion of the video because you'll always get more techniques in the first explanation of the video as well. So starting with my darkest color here, my RV34, let's pop in and add all of our shadow lines. So I'm going to pop in and add in any cast shadows around the petals. So remembering that these ones are sitting in front, so I'm just going to pop in and add a nice thick shadow around them. Remember, it doesn't need to be super duper fine when you do your cast shadows. It'll help everything just to pop out even further for you. Now you can add cast shadows around the other petals, but we want to keep it just a really small amount. So I'm not extending out through these tips or anything. I'm just keeping it in the very shadow areas here. Okay, now you can also add in any line work that the artist has added for detail if you'd like to come up any of the creases in the petal as well. So just using the same techniques that we went through previously, just coming up these lines, but I'm just only adding the detail in this very shadow area. And you can also add to these little petals in front as well. Time to blend out. I'm going to grab my RV32 and I'm just adding a touch of the color in each of these areas, and I'm extending up just a very small amount again. So it's really not coming up any more than halfway in the petals. So try and scale it back. Now this color blend, you may notice in your booklets, doesn't really keep with the standard highlight, midtone and shadow blend that you may be used to that we go through in class. This is because we want this blend to appear a lot lighter, a pink color, rather than some of the richer shades like the RV60s that we used. So to compensate for this, instead of keeping the darker shadow colors there, what we've done is made our midtone our shadow, but in order to keep the contrast, we've gone right back down to the RV00 in the very highlight area. So we've lightened our highlight and lightened our shadow. So even if you want a lighter blend with something more pastel, you still want to keep contrast. We're still keeping all that happening so our light source still pops out. but it's just allowing us to scale that all down from every aspect, so we are keeping in with that. So it's a little bit more advanced, and it's something that we go through when we do all of our monthly classes and everything else each month as well. We go through all of that color theory. And now I'm going to pull through a touch of RV00. So bringing that lighter color straight on top, and again extending that a little bit further out. However, keeping it only in the first half of the petal here. We're making sure that we don't extend that too much further, that it impedes on the area that we want to appear white. You can add a touch of this color in the back as well. I might even go through and add that with my RV32, so my mid-tone, just adding a touch on those very back petals there that are peeking up. And then you can blend out softly again with this RV00. Okay, so that's your two-tone done. However, we don't want to leave the white just as white, because we need it to be consistent and still show that we've got all of that detail happening. We've got that light source showing off as well. So I'm starting here today with my C3, and I'm just going to add just to any shadow details here. So you're keeping in the very, very shadows. Now usually I like to use my warm greys rather than my cool greys when doing whites, because our item is out in the sun, and typically the sun has a warmer hue. However, I'm using my cool greys today, as my W greys are all locked up at the moment for an event that we've got coming up. So you can see, even though I'm using the cool greys, and I'd usually prefer to use the warm grey, it's still actually giving you the same results. You're still able to work with them. So any greys that you have in your stash are going to be a great choice. Coming down now into C1, and you just pop straight over the top and just add a little bit further out. So only a touch of this color though, keeping it mainly white, but still being able to work through the shadow areas. Now in these earlier stages, the shading can look a little bit dark, because it actually is, you're adding grey to the page, so it's not super duper light. It's when we actually step back and see it with every other color that it actually comes together. And then you can add a touch of C0 again just over the top of those previous colors and extend a little bit further down. And this again is just helping to really softly transition that color to the white of the paper. And that's all there is to it. You can go ahead and do the center like normal, but you can see there, if I pop this one over the top, that might look a little bit dark along the edges, but when you pop in the original and see it all in context, it actually comes together really nicely, because it's kept the consistency of showing light source, but it's still very nice and light, definitely showing that two-tone look. So doing the two-tone and the markers is so easy. You just lay down your first color, and then you can come in with your second there with the white. So you can even practice that on some of the other blooms in the scene as well. In the next part of the video, we're going to be going ahead and doing the text and the soft background. In this part of the video tutorial, I'm going to be going through the text and the soft background. Now, I'm going to be starting here with my pencils first, and I'm just going to bring back the original to show you what we're going to achieve. I'm achieving this, it looks almost metallic here, how we've got the darker shadows in each letter, but then we come to that really nice bright light highlight there. So we're still utilizing light source to get depth, even in these small details like the text. It just helps everything to pop out that little bit more. So don't ever underestimate utilizing your light source and going to that little bit extra with your detail there to make things stand out. On the edges for your shadows, I've got a really soft gradation of the color. So I'm starting with the same aquas that I've used on some of the flowers and the text, and just really softly blending it out so the middle and around the text is still the light white, but the top and the bottom have that sort of glow and hint of color. So let's go ahead and do that first with our pencils. Now I'm going to start with my lightest color to begin with, and that's my light aquamarine. And all I'm doing is make sure the pencil is nice and sharp. I'm going to bring this straight through the text. Now when you're doing really small details like this area is really fine, try to keep your pressure really light. If you press down, that's when you get that sort of fuzzy edge on the pencil. But if you keep your pressure really nice and light, it will help you to have that control and keep your line work nice and fine. Twist your pencil as you work so you're always working on that sharpest point. Okay, now I'm going to grab my darkest color, and that's my cobalt turquoise. And on each individual little area, I'm going to be adding this darkest color from both the top and the bottom. So I'm just working with just what a standard light source would be. Either side is darker, middle is lighter. And that's what's going to help the text to get that sort of metallic, sort of shiny look. Again, on these really fine areas, make sure you don't press down very hard. Keep it nice and soft so you have that control. And make sure that you extend enough of the darkest color so you actually see it on the page. If you're only adding a little bit, you won't be able to get that contrast effect as much. You can see already how that definitely has that effect happening there. And then I'm just going to come back with my light aquamarine again, and I just come over where the cobalt turquoise has ended just to blend the transition smooth between the colors, and then I just usually pop straight back through that middle again just to flatten any remaining tooth. And that's all there is to the text. So nice and easy, but it looks really effective. So when you're doing this technique, just make sure that you pick two colors that are far apart from the same family. So pick a nice contrast between light and shade so you can actually visually see that difference. If the colors are really close together, it's not going to stand out as much and give you that effect. Okay, so that's the text all done. Now I'm going to pop up and do the shading at the bottom. Now, you can choose to cut this out first or add this in without cutting it out. It's totally up to you. If you're not cutting it out, I recommend getting a lead pencil you can just really roughly draw in the extent, so where it's sort of going to run to, so you know where your shading is going to start. You can use a ruler if you like. I'm just freehanding it. Just because it's rough, I'm going to be cutting it out anyway, but it just gives me a bit of a guide as to where my color actually needs to be placed. So I'm going to start with cobalt turquoise and just really, really softly, so soft, hold it back away from the edge if you struggle with that. But I'm just adding the smallest amount, just a small touch up from the base here. So you're bringing it about halfway up through this petal. You can bring this through some of the other areas as well. Just really nice and soft. Now I'm going to swap into my light aquamarine. And all I'm doing is just really softly starting straight over the top. Really little soft circles. Keep your pencil sharp, pressure light, and I'm extending a little up. And as I get up, my pressure is going to become even softer. And then I sort of get to this sort of top petal, and you can see my pressure is just tapered out, so it's now just softly going to the white of the paper there. You can even come back and do another layer at the bottom, deepening it up at the bottom there. We're getting that smooth gradient from dark to light. So it's darker here, and then I lighten my pressure as I get further up, and you can see it softly transitions. Same in each area here. So this is a really easy and effective way to add shading around any image. You can add this even if you've got a character in the middle. You can just add this sort of soft shading just around the edges or around the top and bottom, just allowing it to fade away to white around the actual image or character. You might even add just a little bit, sort of we want to keep it in line the whole way across. So you have a look at where your white space is. Add in any extra areas straight through. And then what we do is we grab a white pencil. Make sure you've got no color on the pigment. Sometimes if you've been coloring, say, pink, there might be pink on there. I just rub my finger on top until it's clean. Start from the white. So we start off the color, softly circling, and then I come back and circle over the color here. Now I'm working very, very small circles. You can see I'm working in each tiny little area at a time. I'm using a medium pressure and I'm pushing the pigment around as I work. And I keep going over it over and over and over until it's all starting to blend smooth, pushing that pigment down. Remembering that this is only a soft background as well. Now as you get to the bottom, you'll come over that darker cobalt turquoise. Again, take your time working each little area until it's smooth. You may even need to come back over some areas again. If you've been really light-handed and your green's really soft, you can layer softly again and then again come softly back with the white. So you can keep layering it until you're happy with your look. Let's see here, starting at the top, and I'm just working through each of these areas until the two's flattened and the color is all softly blended out. So that's the bottom all done. You can see it's darker at the bottom and softly transitions up to the white. Now coming in from the top, and we can just do the same thing. So you either got it cut out or you can just draw the extent in with a lead pencil just roughly so you know where the lines and the colors are going to go to. Keeping in mind you'll be cutting out the edge anyway. Adding in a soft amount of the cobalt turquoise, keep it soft so you don't get any hard lines through there. and I'm bringing in my light aquamarine. It's nice and soft. Gradually getting lighter as you get toward the flowers. And grab your white pencil and you can start from the white of the page here, softly circling back and over the color to blend. Keep circling very, very small circles. If your circling is too large and your strokes are too long, it sort of skips over the pigment of the paper. And that's when you can actually see your lines and it can look a bit scratchy and the tooth's not quite flattened. So if this is what's happened, take your time, come back over everything, go nice and small with your line work and soft. And that's all there is to it. So you've got that soft transition from the top, soft transition from the bottom. And when you come to your final piece, that's how that all comes together. So that's actually your coloring of the pencils tutorial all done. So you can see we've gone through a lot of different techniques here. I haven't colored up every flower. It's now your turn to take those techniques and I want to see you challenge yourself and color up the rest of the flowers in the scene. So we've gone through a lot of technique already, color theory, light source, adding in detail and depth. And it's the same on every other flower that you've got here in your scene. The techniques don't change if your colors do. The only little tip that I have for you is when you get to your yellow flower here, it's just the same as the pink one. Remembering that that shadow color is a lot darker than we want the main petals to be. So scale that back a little bit. The more you add, the darker the flower is going to become. And if it happens that it's quite dark, that's totally okay as well. And it's again something that you can work towards next time when you do your next practice. If you get stuck on any aspect during this tutorial, feel free to take a quick photo, pop it over, and let's go through it together. I really can't wait to see how you go with your coloring. Make sure you pop over to our Facebook group and share your progress. Everyone would love to see, and everyone is so supportive as well. It's all about supporting each other no matter what level we're on, because we've all started as beginners. So even if you're brand new to coloring, we started exactly where you are. I started exactly there as well, and I made every mistake to get my coloring to here to where it is now. And now it's just your turn to do that too, to put in that practice, to challenge yourself, to go over the technique, to try your classes and jump in so you can start your journey to growing your coloring. I'm looking forward to seeing more from you, and again, hope to see you in our classrooms. Thank you so much for watching. Okay, so we're going to go over the text with our markers now. Now, there's one little problem with this. The text here is really, really very fine, and if you're not comfortable with those fine lines, you may have a little bit of a struggle here with this type of image. In this case, you can absolutely combine your markers with your pencils, and if you have some pencils, you could just follow the same technique that we went through in the pencils video on your marker paper here, and you wouldn't really be able to tell. It's such a small little detail that you'd still be able to get that transition nicely. Alternately, what you can do is just do it all in one color. You could use a fine liner or something else, or just use one color of your alcohol marker. But if you are comfortable with your fine lines, you can use the two-tone just like I'm going to do. So let's just start. I'm starting with BT53 and I'm holding the marker nice and close to the nib here. I'm just going to apply. You can see I'm just so softly touching this to the page. I'm not pushing my marker down at all, and I'm resting it on the second finger, so it's sitting high up the page, and when I pull it closer to the page, only that very tip is touching. So if you haven't practiced that yet, you may find this really helps, especially at this point. Make sure if your markers are new that you uncap as you work so you don't get any blobs or anything on your page. You notice as well that I'm working quite quickly. I find that this gives me less time to think it through, and I actually press a little bit lighter with the marker. If you get any outside of the lines, don't forget you can use your colorless blender. So just pop in with your blender and sort of push that ink back in toward the letter, and it should remove any pigment for you. I've got a few little bits that are going out of the line, but I'm not too worried. This color is pretty light, so it's not really going to show up too much at the end result. Okay, now we want to come in and do the shadows. So I'm just going to add a touch of BG57, and I'm going to think of this just as a standard light source. So either side dark, middle light. And I'm just going to come up on the point and add a touch of this darker color to either side of each part of the text. And you can see it's just incorporating that contrast between light and shade to get that sort of shiny look there. Now to just get the blend smooth between the colors, I'm going to come back with BG53 again and just start straight through the middle, and you can just come over the ends of where the BG57 has ended, just to smooth out the blend. Now you may find you even want to add in a little bit more depth. You can even add a darker color on the very edges if you like as well. And that's all there is to the text. Just gives us a really soft two-tone look. Now to do the shading at the bottom, just going to zoom out a little bit here. Now we're just going to fade the shading out. So if I take a look at my finished image, you can see I've got the aqua at the bottom and it fades up toward the middle, where the middle is all white, and the same from the top, the aqua at the top fading down. So to do this, we're going to use a series of the aqua colors and our colorless blender. So what you can do is you can cut out your image, or you can just draw with a lead pencil just sort of straight across so you know where the extents of the image are going to go, so you know where you're going to cut it out. And that can just be rough, it doesn't matter, you'll be cutting that line off anyway at the bottom. So I'm going to use BG57, and I just come straight along the bottom, and then I'm just going to feather up really softly some lines, just like we did at the start of the video down the bottom, just feathering and getting that fine point on the edges. Now through here where there's not a lot of space, you don't need to worry as much. And just come up just a little bit on the side. Let's do the same thing and just feathering up from that edge there. BG53 is next, and we come straight over the top. So start from the bottom, straight over the top, and you can see I'm doing multiple strokes over the line of where that color has ended, just until the line between the colors is smooth. You can extend it a little further up with this color as well if you like. You can see I've sort of brought it up to that lower petal area there. Same on these other parts. Try and keep it all sort of roughly in line, straight across. And B00 is next. This color is even lighter again, and I'm just coming over that edge and back over if you need to remove any lines. I'm sort of bringing it straight up to this top petal here. And bring this through any areas that you like as well. Make sure that you're always feathering though as you work so it ends softly. Overlap all your strokes so you don't see any individual lines. And then just to smooth it all down, grab your colourless blender and you just start from the top here and then just apply a few strokes where that blue actually ends, just over that edge. And you can do the same through this whole area. Just a few strokes back and forward and you'll see it just really softly finishes that colour. So you get that really soft transition from the colour gradiating up. Let's do the same from the top of the page. So I'm going to come in from the top here and I'm just going to draw in the extents of where my image is going to end, just doing it really roughly because I'm going to cut it out anyway. Then I grab my BG57 and I'm just going to bring this straight along the top. Feather as you get further away to help the colour end softly. So you can even do your line straight across, but then feather down even further. BG53 is next. And then I'm feathering this colour down a little bit on the page. Remember, if you can see a line between the colours, it just means you need a few more strokes to blend it smooth. Rather than just blending just over the top, remember the strokes want to come over that line and then you can blend back as you need. Bit of trial and error if you're new to Copics. It's just all about playing around until you're happy with the layering and the finish. B00 is next. Just comes with time and practice. So don't ever be discouraged if it's a little bit tough today, because tomorrow when you pick them up again, it's going to be that little bit easier. And then come through with your colourless blender and apply back from the white. I kind of like to go over all of that little area just so it doesn't look inky in some parts and not in others. And you can see I'm layering over where that line of blue has ended, just until it softens down a little bit. And that's all there is to it, and you've achieved that same look as what we did with our pencils. So keep in mind this technique works better when your lightest colour is really light. So you can see we took it down to the B00 there, and then we've just applied our colourless blender on top. Now B00 is not that much darker than the white of the paper, and that's what's helped the colourless blender to easily and smoothly get that transition happening. If you were doing a much darker colour, it's going to be a lot harder to get that softer transition. So try and bring that always down to something in your O's so it's very easy and soft to blend out. And that's all there is to it. Your markers one is all done. So that's actually your colouring of the pencils tutorial all done. So you can see we've gone through a lot of different techniques here. I haven't coloured up every flower. It's now your turn to take those techniques, and I want to see you challenge yourself and colour up the rest of the flowers in the scene. So we've gone through a lot of technique already, colour theory, light source, adding in detail and depth. And it's the same on every other flower that you've got here in your scene. The techniques don't change if your colors do. The only little tip that I have for you is when you get to your yellow flower here, it's just the same as the pink one. Remembering that that shadow color is a lot darker than we want the main petals to be. So scale that back a little bit. The more you add, the darker the flower is going to become. And if it happens that it's quite dark, that's totally okay as well. And it's again something that you can work towards next time when you do your next practice. If you get stuck on any aspect during this tutorial, feel free to take a quick photo, pop it over, and let's go through it together. I really can't wait to see how you go with your colouring. Make sure you pop over to our Facebook group and share your progress. Everyone would love to see, and everyone is so supportive as well. It's all about supporting each other no matter what level we're on, because we've all started as beginners. So even if you're brand new to colouring, we started exactly where you are. I started exactly there as well, and I made every mistake to get my colouring to here to where it is now. And now it's just your turn to do that too, to put in that practice, to challenge yourself, to go over the technique, to try your classes and jump in so you can start your journey to growing your colouring. I'm looking forward to seeing more from you, and again, hope to see you in our classrooms. Thank you so much for watching.